Hey everybody, this is Gabriel Miguel, and this is the Anastasia Foundation podcast. And today I'm really excited. We have a great guest for you today, Robert Boucher, right? That's how you pronounce that. I didn't mess
Actually,
that
it's
up.
Bucher.
Bucher. All
Yeah,
right. I'm glad I asked. I'm
yeah.
glad I asked. And Robert Bucher, and he's the founder of Aire Education. Robert's journey began with his discovery of Waldorf education, which he called an island of sanity in conventional systems, inspired by global experiences, including a visit to Russia's forest kin school. This is the Tekos school founded by Mikhail Shchetinin, discussed in book 3 of the Ringing Cedars series. Um, and shaped by overcoming personal challenges, Robert founded Aire Education to redefine learning. Through his 9 pillars, he blends Waldorf principles, classical wisdom, and innovative practices to create an education rooted in freedom, authenticity, and holistic growth. And today we're going to be diving deep into Robert's, insights and, story and experiences with Mikhail Shchetinin in school and his journey in education. And there's going to be a lot of stuff here for anyone interested in, whether you're a teacher now or you're a parent interested in homeschooling your children or that entire spectrum of anyone interested in educating children. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation for you. And I forgot to mention, we have Svetlana with us, who is part of the Anastasia Foundation team, and she met Robert at a meetup that she hosted in Austin, Texas. And really glad to have that connection here. So Svetlana will be joining us as well. And Robert, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Nice to
Yeah,
meet you. Okay.
thank you. And so maybe we can get into how did you, well, I guess a bit about your story in Waldorf education and how you found the Ringing Cedars books.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Uh, I've actually recently it's become fascinating to me to see how we end up in a certain place at a certain time and the influence of the soul from above or the soul within, and then the actions we take and then the consequences of those actions and things just come to a certain point in time. So obviously I'm not going to go into that, but I did find myself in an eighth grade classroom teaching in a Waldorf school, and another boy entered the class at the same time with his own different pathway to get there. His name was Sequoia. And Sequoia, he really didn't like school, any type of school. And he's is a so it was hard to get him to work and hard to get him to pay attention, but he loved to learn. So my way of working with him was every day at lunchtime, I would talk with him, just talk with him. And I'd say, well, okay, Sequoia, what have you been learning lately? And then he would start talking. He'd say, well, I started lifting weights, or I'm doing this skateboarding, and I got an idea about a airborne skateboard and this and that. So it's just education through talking because he's doing his own learning. Um, and one day he comes in and he says, oh, Mr. Booker, I found a school I really would love to go to. It's a forest school and it's in Russia. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. So I asked him more about it, and he mentioned the Ringing Cedars books, and basically ended up by saying, you really need to check it out. So that class graduated. And then I got the books, started reading them, and I looked online and saw the video of the Tekos school. And I thought, wow, that's just so incredible. I never imagined anything could be like that. And for both the Ringing Cedars books and the Tekos school, it was like, is this for real? And I'm kind of a person that I just kind of check things out. And so I made the decision to go over there and see for myself. So that's how I learned about the books and the Tekos school.
Mm, yeah, thank you. And for those who have never seen it, right? Because the books are described in text in I mean, not the books, the school is described in text in book 3 of the books. But I would love to show some photos of the school because it's a pretty profound place. Um, and it's unbelievable if you haven't ever seen it with your own eyes, right? So this photo is here. This is literally one of the classrooms, and it's just kind of hard to imagine that a place like this even exists and that this is just a classroom, but here we are. And so going through, these are some of the hallways and things like this, things like that. It's just a pretty unbelievable place. So when you went to the school, how long did you stay? What was your experience like?
Well, I'm really glad you're showing those photos because when we first arrived at the school, it was with a tour with Yuri, and
Hmm.
we arrived at the school. I just looked at the quality of the buildings from the outside, and quite frankly, I was speechless. I just, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you don't know
Mm.
what to say. And then you go inside and I'm like, what? How can this be? It was just kind of a sense of speechless. And I had arranged through Yuri that we had an interview or a talk, a conversation with Mikhail Shchetinin. And so we went up into the room, and the room again is impressive with a big wooden table and a beautiful room. Everything's full of beauty. And he had two student administrators there and himself. And my son was there, Jason. He was 16 years old at the time. And we sat down at the table and had a conversation with Mr. Shatinin. Um, very, very interesting conversation. I'll mention one story he told. First of all, he did ask at the beginning, which is interesting. Who are your ancestors? What is your ancestry? And I gave a kind of superficial answer of Germanic, and Celtic or Irish. And at that time, I also realized I really didn't know much about my ancestors. And I don't mean my family line. I mean just anything deep about that. Um, and then at one point, he told a story about himself, and which very deep story in a way, but it was so simple that when he was a boy, he received a report card from school, and it was a poor report card, in particular about conduct and such. So his father was rather maybe angry at him, but basically his father was giving him the impression that you're just not doing what you can do. You're not being a good young boy. And so then later, his mother was listening to that, but later his mother came up to him and said, "You are a good boy." And the way
Mm.
she said it, we can tell from the story that it went right into his heart. And it was something
Mm.
that it lived in him the whole time. That was the point of his story. So we talked about a number of things. Um, and it's interesting at the end of it. Well, I was so impressed by the school. I was also thinking, how could this ever be replicated in the world? And I mentioned that to him. I thought, how could I go back to what
Mm.
I was doing? It's just nowhere near what you've accomplished here. And his point of view was anybody can do it. And I really, in my heart, just couldn't believe that. But his point of view was anybody can do it. You just go step by step, and the children will bring it out if they have the opportunity. And at the end of the conversation, he was so interesting. I was feeling inside, I felt very small, just a small feeling like I could never do this. And I'm just like, all I accomplished was very small compared to this. And then he looked at me and he said, through the translator, but he said, in Russian, he said, "You are a big man."
Mm.
So simple, but it just
Wow.
right in. Um, and so that was the end of the conversation. And then we went on the tour.
I just want to add, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's
Please.
important to mention that all those beautiful things, most of them made by students, right? Like
Yeah.
all the buildings and paintings and all those, it's all kind of part of their life to do that beauty around themselves.
Hmm.
And
Right. All
wow,
those
that's
paintings were done by the
mhm.
students.
And I think like every student feels same as Robert, feel big when he made that environment that kids feel big, like in a good way of that meaning. That just I really feel that too. That's
Yeah.
impressive. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Robert.
Yeah, he
Mhm.
created a learning community. He didn't actually like to say school. He used the term learning community in the conversation.
Mm.
And so we were there for the first day. We did the whole tour. And then they invited us back again for the second day to watch them do dance practice. Now, I'll tell one story from the tour that really stuck with us and is still one of the things I'm yet to find out about how to do it. So part of the tour went by a math class, a group of students, mixed age students. And my son, again, he's 16, he was in a Waldorf high school. He said, well, how long does it take you to do the whole high school math curriculum of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, uh, pre-calculus or calculus, and trigonometry and this type of stuff? And they said, I'm going to make it a little longer because it makes it at least a little bit more believable. They said like 3 weeks. And so Jason, of course, thought, well, they did a poor translation. They didn't understand my question. So we
Mm.
asked the question again, and they said the same thing. And so then I asked, well, if you finish it in like such a short time, what do you do after that? And they said, well, we do interesting things. So I'm putting that story out there. To me, it's a total mystery. And so it's a mystery to me, and maybe I'll find out more about it later. And then for coming back the second day, we watched the dancing. And again, especially as Jason, he's an athlete, he was just in awe. And he's like, wow, if I went to a school like this. And the tour guide was with us again, both of them actually. And as they're walking us back to the car, she did mention, they spoke English very well. And she said something again that's kind of strange. We offer like 12 languages. And it's always like, how can this possibly be? But she did mention at the end about Waldorf education that she said, we are interested in a particular aspect of Waldorf education to get into more, and that's the Goethean science or phenomenology or aether science, as they call it. So that was the experience at the Tekos school.
Well, Svetlana, you're muted.
Oh, good now.
Yeah. Wow. That's an incredible
Mhm.
experience, Robert. And I mean, what a privilege to have met and spoke with Shchetinin like that as well. And for those who don't know, he recently passed away a couple years ago. Um, so he's no longer on the physical plane, but his impact is definitely felt by all the teachers that, and students that he was able to impact and inspire kind of this next generation, this wave of people to continue in that legacy, right? In that way of thinking. And those are just some incredible things that highlight the potential of children when their minds and their hearts are completely free, right? When they are um I remember in the books he talks about um right, like children being this idea of them being free and feeling safe and having a reason for why they're learning things. This accelerates their retention and um their retention and engagement with the information and everything like that. And his mind is incredible, and it sounds like this trip profoundly impacted you and your son. And so when you came back to the United States after that trip, I'd imagine you were reflecting pretty deeply on things, your experience, and probably comparing Waldorf education with what you'd experienced there. And what was that like for you?
Yeah, at that time, I was a Waldorf. I was the education director at the Waldorf school. Previously, I had experience as a class teacher. A class
Mhm.
teacher in Waldorf, you take the class through first grade all the way through eighth grade. And it really is quite a journey. I had done that a couple times. And when I finished the second
Right.
time, they asked me to interview for the education director, and they gave me the position of that. So I came back and I did show my school, the teachers, the uh, Tekos school video. And they saw, they were kind of interested. A couple of them were like, no, I don't like that. It's too militaristic. Um, and but you know where I got the most strong reaction for Waldorf teachers? At a certain point, I had there was a Chinese student at the school, and through the parent, they asked me to go to China, Guangzhou, and mentor at the school there. And
Mm.
it was so interesting when I was there mentoring. I brought up the Teiko school, and it turned out like about five of the teachers had read the Ringing Cedars books.
Mm.
And so I showed the video to them too. And one of their reactions was they seem like people from a different planet.
Mhm.
It was so
Yeah.
amazing to them, but they
Right.
were very interested in it. And again, after that, a number of teachers who wanted to discuss the Ringing Cedars books and all of this, we got together and talked about it together. So that was where I had the most feedback from teachers of the Teiko school. Now, I'm going to mention something about the Waldorf school. Well, I'll mention another experience too that ties in with area education. And that
Hmm.
was during the COVID lockdowns. I kind of got tired of just sitting around. So I applied and got the job of a Waldorf class teacher at the Lakota Reservation in South Dakota. And I found that very interesting, in particular, the way they were doing with their cultural heritage. They had a cultural heritage teacher from the age of 1, and I spoke with him quite a bit. And I found this incredible resource that they use all the way from grade 1 through 12, which gives the children their heritage and a feeling for their ancestors and a feeling of the Lakota stories and a real feeling for it. And the spiritual teachings, like all our relatives, that all nature and the respect for your elders and the medicine wheel and all these things that are really Dharma type of cultural teachings, which were around the whole world at one time. And so, and very importantly for the Lakota, I mean, I'm saying they had this wonderful revival of their culture and their heritage that they're doing from their children very early, which is totally missing from the education system in the United States. And they also, of course, need to teach their students life skills because the reservation, it has much poverty and problems. So they, all the way through, they're teaching them life skills about decisions regarding their spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical body. And again, quite frankly, that is missing in the educational system as well. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't want to get into that too much. I'll get into this other story about the Waldorf, which is on the website, that
Hmm.
Rudolf Steiner, when he founded Waldorf Education, he could not really work the way he wanted to. Mr. Shchetinin had more freedom that way.
Right.
And so he had to the curriculum, the whole Waldorf curriculum, which is you do this in first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way through, which actually makes it difficult to work with. Um, that was created by a man named Stockmeyer. And Steiner, at the founding of the first school, according to the story I heard, is that we will work within the holes of the net, with the net being the education system of Germany. Now, what's
Hmm.
important for Steiner education and why I stick with it so much and why I make it a part of area education is his indications, which he puts through all different things in the curriculum or any subject and how to teach it. So these indications are the important part for me, such as he recognized that in virtually everything in the educational system, what we teach our children it's been deadened by materialism. And so he's giving indications, how do you enliven that which you teach such that it comes alive again? That's one of his indications that you find throughout the curriculum. And another one he does in terms of when do you bring things to children at a certain age? Public school, for the most part, they have a big, long list of things they want to teach. And they have a big, long list of standards as well. It's all standards based. Then they kind of divide it up in a way, and they just kind of give it to the children at different times. I remember I had a student, my first class through, there were two friends, Heather and Sochi, and Heather had to leave after the fourth grade, and she went to a public school. She wrote a letter to her friend, which the mother of that friend happened to pick up and read. And in the letter, she said, Sochi, at this school, they just teach anything whenever. There's no like reason for it. It's just put in any time. But at the Waldorf school, we lived it. So the reason for that is because of Steiner's indications that the children enter into their physical body as souls, spiritual beings, and they're incarnating. And these particular curriculum things, indications he gives, such as fairy stories in the first grade and fables in the second, and then and so on, they meet the children where they are. So I'm staying with that, although I am making a change. I always found it rather strange, and I'm not going to go into it very much, that they go from fairy tales and fables, because to the children up to 9 years old, everything is alive, everything communicates. And there's a change in the nine year, according to Steiner. So he brought in the Old Testament, but I'm actually changing that because I've always found it difficult to teach, and it doesn't resonate with me in particular. But I go to the Irish mythology, and what I've discovered with Irish mythology and looking at is so unbelievable. It's so incredible. And I think I'm definitely going to stay with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a thing that probably a lot of people are not aware of, is the constraints that Steiner was working with, right? He was hired to put together this school um, for a company and for the children of the employees of the company, right? It was in Germany. I believe it was like a cigarette company or something like that, right? Or
Cigar.
some, yeah, cigar company. Right. And for the employees of that company. And he had some constraints to work with, but he did see that there was an opportunity to make an impact. And he was a brilliant man, a genius, and accomplished some incredible things, especially in that time, to have such an impact to now. And it's interesting what you mentioned about the education being tainted by materialism, right? Because it made me think there's a quote here as well that I wanted to read from Mikhail Shchetinin in book 3 of the books, where he says, the child must be enrolled in a natural cosmic process, eternal self-reproduction. Then you have given the child eternity, the joy of life, real existence, not just illusory forms like, see here, son, I bought you a shirt and trousers and shoes. Now I can die. But what have you really given your son? Your gifts, after all, won't last more than a single season. If only you had given your son your good name, your honor, your work, your friends, a flourishing people. If you had given him an understanding of the truth of being and a life of wisdom, then you could say, son, I have given you the most important thing. You will be happy. You will buy shirts and build houses. You now know how it is done, right? And it's just such a profound way of thinking, right? You're talking about this laundry list of things that they want to shove into the child's head at different times, and it's all senseless and there's no order, right? But Shatinin is starting from enrolling the child in the natural cosmic processes, right? And this is such a great reframe of what we think about as educating children. And if my memory serves me, uh, correct. I think the Greek word for education, whatever that was, I think it was like en theos or something like that. And it meant to pull from within, rather where our method is to take things from without and cram them in to children's minds, right? But, real education being something that emerges from the child from inside. And just some thoughts there about what you're saying.
Yeah, that's great, Gabriel. And I really think, and maybe you're the man to do it, that I really think there should be a book written on Mr. Shchetinin's pedagogy and
Mm,
thoughts. It would be really
wow.
helpful because people see the videos, but that's all they're seeing is videos. It would be very helpful to have a book on that if you have that much
Mm.
material.
That's a
Mhm.
great
Mhm.
idea.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because there's books on other educational methods and
Hmm.
things like this, right? And,
Mhm.
and we're actually in touch with a bunch of teachers and students and people from Shchetin school, and we could interview people and put together, we could do that. Svetlana, remember we're working on the
Yeah,
book project, right?
yeah, yeah.
We have another
We,
book
we,
project that we're
we have
actually
projects,
working on. And I
but
think,
that's
yeah,
very needed, I would say,
yeah.
and definitely like many students are teachers now, and I know some students they make their own like methods of teaching, and my friends are at their schools now. They're doing like online schools too, and I think they have probably many things to share it too. So then we can combine it as their as this something as a book, or that's definitely because after that school was closed. I already told Robert previously, like all the students, they kind of spread around the Russia, around the settlements. They start teaching themselves and gathering people around. So maybe that's the time to search and ask questions.
And by the way, that's exactly what Anastasia said would happen in book three, which was published in, I don't know, like 99 or something, that
Mhm.
eventually the students from Shatinin school would go and be the teachers at the new
Yeah,
settlements. And you're
yeah,
seeing it
that's
play out like 25 years later, right?
that's what's happening now. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, what I realized when I started this area education is that you can only, I'll just say my opinion, you can
Mm,
only create something out of your own, where you are in your state of consciousness.
Mhm.
So you have,
Mhm.
Steiner was an initiate, obviously, and Mr. Shchetinin was a Vedun. And so people can take, but when the people start teaching, because they learned a bit, they're going to create out of their own consciousness.
Mhm.
So the Tekos school and what he created, Mr. Shittitan himself, was a treasure, and it can be lost if you don't try to
Mhm.
preserve it.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
mm,
Mhm.
And I'll mention, if you mentioned the root words of words, the roots are very important. I don't know if these are true, but I picked these up along the way in various kind of translation. And English, the root of the English is, like you said, is like to bring forth, kind of like a
mm.
Socratic way of through questions. And that comes back to Anastasia. The questions accelerate thinking and they bring forth.
Mhm.
As I picked up from reading about the Tekos school, this other stuff I had, according to that, it may not be accurate, but the root for the Russian word for education was image formation,
Yeah,
that
that's
we need to
Oh,
be able to
yeah.
form our own images.
It's called
And
obraz. Obraz means image
yeah,
because we call it образование, so it's like giving the image to someone. Yeah, that's how it is.
and that phrase obraz is also what Anastasia refers to. She
Yeah,
says throughout the books, like image of life or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Obraz жизни, right,
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
your image of life as well.
which
Mhm.
is which is one of the reasons that in Waldorf schools they tell the stories. They don't read
Mhm.
from books.
Mm,
They tell the story as our
Mhm.
ancestors did, so
Yeah,
that
that's
we
exactly
form
how.
images, and this
Mhm.
stays alive. And another teacher, speaking of the Greek, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but a teacher told me that in the root of the real Greek language for education, it has to do with to play.
oh,
Mhm.
And then in
Mhm.
Chinese, when I asked them there, And interesting enough, that character for Chinese is a stick. You're holding a stick, but it actually doesn't really mean I'm going to beat you or you may get hit, but it has more to do with the nature of Kung Fu, that you want to acquire skill. And in order to acquire skill, you need to have discipline. So those four words are kind of the whole picture of education.
Hmm. Right. Kung Fu means like skill in
Right.
general. Right. So there's things like I'm familiar with Kung Fu tea or Kung Fu cha, right? Which is the ceremonial tea, but it means skill tea, right?
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah, and regarding the images, what I notice from like babies, when you start reading them the book, they don't like it. But they
Hmm.
like when you tell it your own words, when you like show the picture. And when I start reading, he will start crying. But if I will tell it in my own words, he would listen. So that
Hmm.
really means that they are kind of naturally wants to hear stories, as you said, not just read the book.
You know, and this is such a fascinating point and something that I'm really interested about the Waldorf approach as well. And even if you look at how Anastasia laid out everything, because essentially she set out on a mass worldwide educational project to educate all of humanity, essentially, by inspiring them. And she did it through telling stories. And she
Mhm.
planned out how she was going to do all the books, right? She must have known how to sequence them and what the contents would be, and it's all takes place as a story. It's Vladimir's adventure, it's the hero's journey of him being this, how did I get roped into this
Yeah.
completely
Mhm.
hopeless thing in the beginning
Mhm.
to becoming a really profound and beautiful person at the end of it, right? And his
Mhm.
journey of all that and his experiences with her, and it's fascinating that and the
Mhm.
inspiration that people gain from that and the images that they form in their mind, and all she talks about is these images being the most important thing behind the story. Or Robert, you mentioned earlier what I found really beautiful, your experience at the Lakota reservation, where they're talking about their history and really giving the students like that deep experience of, Lakota lore and tradition. And I even think from book three, when Vladimir went to the school, when he visited Shchetinin in school after Anastasia had kind of shown him this vision of it, and he visits and he starts interviewing these young girls that are there. And they start talking about, he's like, what kind of future man would you want? And all the girls talk about like a man that loves Russia and his motherland, right? And
Yeah.
like, someone who's like, I had never heard, you never hear kids talking like that, like
Hmm.
someone who loves this land. And there's something about, tradition and those deeper things that seem to be really important here, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that now you're getting into the kind of the nature of area education, because I took from Tekos school and I took from different sources.
Hmm. Please, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
get into it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go in terms of this area education thing. The
Hmm.
first step, I just want to mention my son, Jason, for this, because again, this never would have happened unless this happened before that, and this happened in my life. And I was teaching at the school, which I'm now working with area education, and I would have kept on keep teaching, but the great illness struck, and so I couldn't teach, and then I had to struggle to survive and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the greatest teachers, of course. But he had created an agency, he calls it Impact Agency, in which he's trying to help people help coaching businesses and such. So it is he who told me, you have a lot of knowledge, you could do something with that and create something.
Mm.
And he's the one who got me going. The first part was oriented towards homeschoolers. It's just had many additions till it's at the point where it is now. So he's responsible for that. Um, and it
Beautiful.
starts really with the word Aire, which is an old Irish word, which means nobleman, a free man, man and woman, and strength. And then
Mm.
again, I go from my own experience, but I'm looking at three major sources, three great educational sources, which the first one is Waldorf. And actually, Jason came up with this. Waldorf tends to be quite, if you're going to say one way or another, it's more feminine.
Mhm.
Then I took
Yeah.
classical education in terms of what it brings. In terms, it's 3 stages of, I'll get into that later, but it's more masculine. And
Hmm.
then Jason's idea was, because he was there, but the Tekos school is more transcendental. It transcends both of those. And then you're getting into the whole idea of Anastasia too. So combining those is what I did in a certain way. Um, so at a certain point, I did look at other educational ways also. And
Hmm.
they have some really nice strong points, some of them, the way Montessori, the children is directed. You don't need to have a class teacher and a teacher doing this and that. And it actually takes away from a lot of social problems from children who don't want to learn and this, but actually their concepts are not really that deepened, and it doesn't have the indications of Steiner and other schools like Sudbury. One of the things I do, I look at the students from that school, kind of like a spiritual seeing, and then I look at like the Takeo school and I say, wow, these students got a lot more happening
Mm.
than these ones. So I came down to these particular 3 influences in particular. And at a
Mm.
certain point, I got this idea of the 9 pillars. And I started to say, all right, 9 pillars. What are the pillars of the whole educational system? And that broke it down in a way that I could actually work with it if people have a question. So I could go through those if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be great to get into that.
Okay. So the first pillar is influenced a lot by Tekos school, and it's heritage, roots, real history. And the one thing I noticed, Waldorf students can go all the way through kindergarten, first grade, all the way through 12th grade. And they're actually getting a lot of stuff that's their heritage. But when they finish 12th grade, they have no clue of their heritage. They're kind of like potted plants, is the way I compare it. That
Mm.
they don't have roots, they don't have deep rooted trees. They could easily be picked up and moved. So I saw it basically, that they can be very influenced by the kind of cultural Marxism of society, and they can pick up all this really distorted stuff because they don't have any sense of their heritage, roots. And when I look at the Teiko school in the videos and being there, it's like you're looking at trees, rooted
Mm.
trees, and rooted trees are not very easy to move around. So that's why I put that as the first pillar.
Mm.
And real history, that's another big one. Anastasia talks about real history, how
Right.
Orwell has a quote. I think, let me think of it a second. It's he who controls the past controls the future. He
Hmm.
who controls the present controls the past, right?
Yeah.
So who controls the present rewrites the history basically. And Anastasia gives examples of that in the book.
Can
Before,
I jump in real quick on this?
yeah, go
It,
ahead.
so in book 7, Anastasia starts talking about the kind of the history of mankind, right? And she lays out to Vladimir, she presents 3 images to him, right? And she says, you know, the first modern history of mankind is that we were cave people, and somehow we evolved into this feudal thing, and here we are in this beautiful modern era and everything is great, but we're all sick and everything is horrible. But then she said the real view of history is kind of reversed. Like in the beginning, everything was beautiful and perfect, and the planet was in complete harmony, and the planet was paradise. And then the second image she presents is things descended into war. And then she kind of gives an image of a feudal, medieval kind of war kind of thing like that. And then the third image is our modern society where everything is depleted and kind of lifeless, and the technocratic system has, really advanced its development. And she's like, you have to present these images of history. I'm paraphrasing here, but in the correct order to children, right? So they can really understand. And then she says, only then can true education begin, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm going to remember that. That's a good one to put in this here. And basically, actually, I talked to about Mr. Shchetinin about history as well, real history. And he said, yeah, it's very important. Again, the images, it's your images of who you are. But how to get to it and how to teach it is difficult. So I came up with it. What's important is a method, because
Mm.
you can't go into the classroom and have teachers and say, okay, this is real history, because you're just doing indoctrination again. Who knows if
Mm.
that teacher has it correct or not, or nobody has it correct. The important thing is the method. So I came up with the elements of false history versus the elements of real history. So the elements of false history are, first of all, there's an authority figure who's teaching it. Could be casual, it could be a strict teacher, but there's an authority. And the second part is they teach you history is important and we need to learn from it. Okay, so you're kind of getting indoctrinated here. The third part is there's only the history they teach. They don't mention false and real. It's whatever is the majority of teaching, that must be the real thing. And then for real history, I put it, the three elements of it is, number one, the self, the true self is the authority. Because as you're looking for real history, you're going to get a lot of different sidetracks and things that are not real. You have to have a core where you just say, I am the truth, and therefore I can see and know that this is possible. It's not an authority figure. And this is really towards high school type level stuff. And the
Mhm.
second aspect of the real history element is that history is vital to a people. It's vital to have real history, because otherwise you can be misled very easily. And that makes it a quest. It's actually a quest. So you give them a quest. And then the third part is there is such a thing as real history, and there's such a thing as false history, so that you're aware of it. So these things are one method I would use for it. And then in the high school, for the method, you can give presentations and such, but as long as you have these elements and the students are aware of it, they can sort things out. If you don't give them the elements, they just take things in. For example, real quickly, I was teaching a seventh grade from about the Incas, for example, in this
Mhm.
particular block. Um, and the resource material was Waldorf is talking about these massive structures and great stones, some 50 tons, and then how they fit together and so closely together. And I'm explaining this and giving them the images. And the book source said, so I said, and they used like hides of animals with sand to smooth them down and make them fit together. And I said it, and the students just took it right in. And I said, wait
Mhm.
a second, do you actually believe that?
Mhm.
Well, actually, they did believe it because I was the authority and I'm saying it. So if you leave it like that, they will just take it right in because you're speaking it and you're an authority. So in the high school, as well as part of the method, I would teach, or not I, but the students would learn what's called Goethean conversation. And this comes from Goethe. And it's a particular type of conversation where you try to center into yourself, the objective self, and you kind of have this image or not image that the truth is in the center, and you're
Mhm.
trying to arrive at it. And it's a very deep form of conversation. So if they receive topics and different information and such, they also have conversations about it and do it this way. So I'm looking more for a method than trying to say, here is real history. The method is what's important.
Mhm.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and you're saying the way that you arrive at a conclusion is kind of the more important way, right? Because I find that very interesting as you're saying, like if you're just in front and you're lecturing, you're saying even if you could go back and look at some series of historical events and what you're saying is objectively how things played out, still it's kind of you said you're back into indoctrination, which is very interesting, right? Like if someone is just lecturing at and talking at, I'm just throwing things in your head again. And it's very interesting too because where you're talking about being centered in yourself and arriving at things yourself. It's like that's kind of how Anastasia does things throughout the entire books. Because there's a lot of things that she says that you can't necessarily outwardly go and prove directly, right? But it's so appealing to your rationality. It's so appealing to your intuitive senses that you take it as true based on your own feeling. And you just know it's true in some really deep way. And it's a really kind of powerful experience, right? And that's what I'm thinking of as you're talking about this.
Yeah. Do you know when you are lying?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. We know when we're lying. Do we sometimes suspect when another person is lying?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's the self. The self can feel it, but that's not the total reliable way of doing it. It's just an
Mm,
aspect of it. You need a method, the Gertian conversation. You need to really work at it. You need to know how to identify controlled opposition, all of that. But again, that's high school.
sure.
And just having it into the educational method is far beyond any school because they are basically indoctrination centers. That's the truth of the matter. But
Right.
okay, number two is stages and capacities. And that aspect of the pillars is really about Steiner to a large degree, although Mr. Shchetinin also is totally with that as well. But it
Mm,
has a lot to do with the Waldorf education on when to bring things and how to bring them. And I'll just mention here a little bit is Steiner is completely not a standards-based with 1,000 standards type of education. He's about capacities, the capacities of the head, the heart, and the mind. No, the head, the heart, and the hands, or thinking, feeling, and willing, and developing those
mm,
capacities and unfolding those capacities. So that's what is meant by the second pillar and working with that.
hmm.
Now, on the
Thinking,
other hand,
feeling,
I
and
mentioned
willpower.
before that sometimes Waldorf education, which definitely have encountered, it's kind of like a feminine element, and sometimes some students do great and they just get into it, learning for the sake of learning. And on the other hand, sometimes students, they just think, why should I learn anything? There's no real measurement kind of thing. So
Hmm.
it can be a little bit of an issue sometimes. And so the third element is the influence by classical education of clarity of thought and expression. And with the classical education from a speech of Dorothy Sayers in Oxford about 50 years ago, she laid out what she called the lost tools of learning. And they make it in three stages in particular.
Mm,
The first stage is grammar, and then dialectic, and then rhetoric. Grammar goes up to about fifth grade. The middle school is the dialectic, and the high school is more rhetoric. And grammar, you're basically focusing on memorization, really developing the memorization and memorizing things, not useless things, but useful things, and vocabulary and spelling and geography and many things you're memorizing, poetry. And then the second stage of dialectic has to do with developing logic and reason. And the middle schoolers, if you ever teach them, they love to debate and form arguments, and they're very good at it. And the last stage is rhetoric, being able to express yourself in a persuasive manner with real deep thinking. Well, actually, just being able to express yourself with speech and writing. And I mentioned the deep thinking because actually I find some people learn rhetoric very well, but they haven't really gone deeply into the truth. So really, you can speak well, but do you have anything to say?
hmm.
Um, so that's the third stage. Okay, fourth stage, identifying gifts and mastery. This has a lot, it has to do with some knowledge, such as the nine and different intelligences of Howard Gardner is very useful when you're teaching because students really show up. They have different intelligences, but it has a lot to do with observing from the heart. What is the student's gifts? What are their intelligences? One thing, but what gifts do they bring out? And I'll give an example of a story. I had in one of my going through with Waldorf in the sixth grade, I had a student come in named Malcolm from a public school. And Malcolm, boy, he was we do a lot of artwork in Waldorf schools with color pencils. And for
Hmm.
some reason, he broke pencils often. Like I would give him 2 or 3 sets of pencils in the year. He just holding it and starting to work with it. It
Just
snapped.
crush them.
Oh, Mr. Booker, that my pencil broke. It was this thing. He's got definitely kind of a learning disability. And when he would do the page, what we call Waldorf main lesson page, he would like leave a whole quarter of the page and then you start way over here. So something's out of balance. And I didn't know about curative education then, but something's out of balance. Okay,
Hmm.
whatever. I work with it. And then I notice in about the 7th grade, towards the end, that Malcolm, he listens to the history lessons when we're just telling stories. And he really listens and he asks good questions. And then when there's a topic comes up, when there's maybe a debate about it, he forms good arguments. And I say, that's his
Mm.
gift. That's his gift here. So in our report, first of all, I'm not praising just to be praising. I'm bringing something out of him. And
Hmm.
in the report also, I mentioned that Malcolm, he's really good at asking questions and developing arguments. He's like he's a scholar. So he
Yeah.
goes back in the 8th grade, and I see a change in him. He's got it
Mm.
inside himself. I'm like a scholar. I can think deeply. I can ask questions. Okay, that's
Mm.
identifying a gift and bringing it out in a student. Um,
Right.
Very important.
So you're observing a trait or behavior characteristic and then reflecting that back so the child can perceive it.
Yes.
So important. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think nowadays most of the schools they just point on their mistakes and
Yeah.
they just make kids work on be better on those mistakes. Not they just point something good in the kid and kind of accelerate those talented and things. I think this is the most biggest problem in all the education system. Like even I think in any nowadays school, like as I can see, I think that's so important to find that talent and to like make kids to see that themselves, because most of the time, right, those kids who has certain talent, they're not good in many other things, like they're even math or like writing, and they will hear only bad things, or you bad here and here. So thank you,
Mm.
Robert, for bringing that. That's, I think it's it's even for parent. As a parent, we sometimes forget to point more of what kids good at and focus on all those little things they are can be annoying or something like that. It's just reminding for not only for teachers, for parents, first of all, like to find that.
Yeah.
So
This is for the teacher, for the parent, it's kind of heart thinking. You don't observe coldly. You observe with the heart and you notice things. But yeah, just like you said, Svetlana. Okay, the 5th one is character and kinship. This has a lot to do with Tekos school. Mr. Shchetinin said, definitely, he said, the character, what we're doing with character is primary, more important than any type of learning. It's the character.
Mm.
And so how do we develop this character? Obviously, the school systems are not concerned with this that much. They are to a certain degree. I mentioned the Lakota school, the culture teacher from the 1st grade, in that wonderful resource that has 12 books all the way through that they've
Wow.
developed. And it's a good one. I used it in the 7th grade just to try it out. Uh,
Mm.
and so they're working on character. They're working on the heritage and your roots. And I'll mention, for example, the ancestors. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, you probably have.
Yep.
When the king of the Rohirrim, he's often talking about his fathers, and then
Mm.
he finally dies on the battlefield, helping to save Gondor. And his last words are to the effect of, I can now sit in
I
the
can
halls with my
with
fathers.
my father's right.
Yes. So we have nothing of that in the education system, that
Mm.
your ancestors, can you make yourself proud for this? And so that's a
Wow.
part of it as well. Um, yeah, and I looked for a resource actually for the area education, because you know, on one hand you could use the Lakota school one, but you really can't because it's their culture. You can use aspects of it. So one thing I did find, and I'm going to look into a lot more, is what's called the McGuffey readers. They're over
Hmm.
100 years old, and they're readers for there's 6 of them, so different reading levels, but they actually get very high level of literacy, and they're full of moral lessons and character building. And so
Mm.
I may very likely bring that in to the school as a reading form, but also something as alike similar to the Lakota character building type of books that they work with.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing I'm bringing in regarding characters, as it goes back to the expression of a strong mind, a sound mind, and a strong body.
Right.
So physical, look at the Tekos school. They really work very, very
They're
much
very
physical
physical.
fitness, martial
They've
art.
even been criticized for being too physical in some
No,
ways.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but
Yeah,
some people would say that.
yeah. And they wake up every morning and they go take a dip in the cold stream. This is character building, and a physical strong body gives a strong mind and a strong character. So I looked online actually as part of one of the things they'll probably bring this to the school I'm working at. Some homeschoolers, they develop these incredible obstacle courses for their children. And
Hmm.
one of the things I'm very interested in terms of those obstacle courses, one of them in particular, is the amount of grip strength that the children develop. Now,
Yeah.
again, the body and the mind very similar. And if you can grip very strongly, maybe it also means you can grip and take hold of concepts very strongly as well.
Right. Willpower. Right.
Willpower and such.
And Robert, I just want to jump in because what you're saying here about developing character and some of the other things you were mentioning earlier remind me so strongly of some of the stories from the Ringing Cedars, right? There's this story of little Ludmila in book 8.2 when she falls in love with Radomir,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the childhood love story, and essentially her grandmother recognizes, and the wise men recognize this. And first, her grandmother kind of criticizes her for being like, "You're a little lazy, you sleep in too much, you don't want to do these things." And then she's like, "But if you go bathe in the stream every morning, right, you'll be more beautiful every single day." Right? Or like, hey, maybe you won't learn how to do all these verses and stuff and make this beautiful kvass like your sister. Your sister will learn and you won't, and maybe Radomir will like your sister or something like that. And she has a strong reason for wanting to do these things, and then she begins to do them, right? She bathes in the stream every day, and she attends all the classes of the wise men, and goes through like a level of discipline with willingness and willpower to do it, and she becomes exceptional in the end, right? And that's one thing that I'm thinking of. I very briefly said the story there, but then another thing that really impacted me when reading the books was that story when they were trying to invade one of the Vaderus settlements, and the Roman soldiers are coming in, and what you're talking about, sound body and sound mind. The Vaderus, those young Vaderus men, they're dual wielding swords, riding on horseback with no armor, just the shirts that their wives hand sew for them. And they, completely disarm the invading Roman force. They tactically outmaneuver them. They don't get tired physically at all. So clearly they're really physically capable young men, right? These are not weak men by any stretch of the imagination. Their stamina is incredible. They're incredibly, dexterous and all these things. Um, they outmaneuver this Roman legion like crazy. And at the same time, they try to inflict no harm. They disarm these men, injure them slightly if needed. Um, but then they administer the healing herbs to them after all these guys are on the floor and they're in pain and they realize they've lost. The Vaderus young men take off their hand-woven wreaths, crowns, and give them the herbs and start telling them to stop fighting and what they're doing is senseless. And that was such a display of what you're talking about of character to me, that a person could be so capable, right? They could have killed all of them if they wanted to, but they restrained themselves in order to teach these other guys a lesson. And that was just an incredible, and there's other stories like that too, but some of the things you're saying here, right? And how that's a story, that's a parable that was told. Even me as like, as a 19-year-old when I read that, really kind of shaped how the kind of person that I wanted to be later in life. Just some things I'm thinking of as you're speaking here. Really beautiful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I have a question for you. Let's see if you know.
Please.
At Tekos school, do you know when they might have had, if they had some kind of a student creating a kind of social disturbance in a different ways? Do you happen to know any methods they used for dealing with that? Did you ever
Hmm.
hear anything?
Trying to think because I've heard a good number of things about the school, but I don't seem to remember anything about that. No.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think
actually,
so.
that's actually one of the most challenging things sometimes
Hmm.
is certain students, individual students, when they become acting out of some reason. There's a reason for it, but you have to find the reason. So I'm dealing with that right now, but anyway, I just thought I'd
Right.
ask you.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll go on. Okay, conscious media and technology, pillar number 6. This is involved with the children's exposure to really garbage indoctrination media, and then the video games, addictive, and social media, which can be addictive and all over the place. And then, of course, we have AI coming, which is, and robotics, which is going to change the world. So again, I'm not going to say what I think about it. For me, for the school or any school like this, what's important is to have a method of dealing with it. So my suggestion to the school is that the parents, and they were actually very interested when I presented this to the parents, that the parents themselves form a group, a small group, so they can have actual good conversations and they research things. They keep up with what is going on with AI and with the robotics because things are really changing and what to all to keep up with all these topics and discuss it. And then this little group comes to the all school meeting where everybody's there and they give a presentation and they
Hmm.
can take questions and have a little conversation, but they need a method to keep up with it and to deal with
Hmm.
it. That was my suggestion.
That's a very interesting idea. And the idea of technology as a whole, right? Some people will say, um, like it's a manifestation of the dark forces, right? And to some degree, it is, right? This technocratic system has developed to this point. We have the internet and all these things, and right. But it's about we're in this world. These things exist, and if they're there, might as well use them for good. And it kind of makes me think of my own life story, where it's like I have a really strong background in technology, but I had a really strong motivation to spread the Ringing Cedars ideas and connect people and inspire people. So I took this thing and I applied it to my reason, and here we have everything that we have now, right? And it's kind of um why and what good can we do with those things, right? And how can we apply them so that they serve our interests rather than we serve the interests of the technocratic system. I'm just mindlessly scrolling and whatever feeding into its algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah, in the past, Waldorf schools tended to have the teachers get together and they say, "Oh, we need this, we need that. This is what we need to do," and then they'd send out these dictums to the parents, and then the parents
Interesting.
either take it up or ignore it or whatever. But actually, the truth is, the method is that the parents need to get involved, and they need to be the ones doing it, and they need to be a community about it. So
Mm,
that was my recommendation.
beautiful.
And then 7, math and science. Uh, Really important with math. It's not so much the standards, although you definitely can put these into the school and see where you are with the public school. It's not a problem. But more importantly is the resources you use. Find good resources. Sometimes they're older ones because a lot of the stuff
Mm,
in the now it's trash. I mean, all the textbooks are standards based and It's just you look for good resources, because a good resource, they didn't really use, for example, a good math resource, they didn't use standards to write the book. They used the logic of math, what follows this, the elegance of it, how to keep it interesting and lively. And then they know children. And these are great math books. Just find good resources and use them.
Right.
That's the main approach for that. And then for math, there is the mystery of what I mentioned with the Tekos school.
Mm.
What are they doing? No one else is doing this. We need to learn it and find it. So that's the second thing for math. As for science, this Steiner is good with this one too, because when Steiner was a graduate student getting his PhD, he edited the works of Goethe, Wolfgang Goethe, because Goethe was actually a great scientist, and it's called Goethean science, or it's also called phenomenology, or you can call it aether science. And when Goethe was working, let me just say, he was working on light, all about light. And at the same time, Newton was working on light. And they were going back and forth. It was kind of like Newton versus Goethe. And Goethe, they were writing
Interesting.
letters and such. And Goethe would accuse Newton of, you're actually not being true to the phenomena. You're making it fit what you want to fit.
Your
So what you
model,
really have
right?
is Goethe, the phenomenology science stream, and the Newton materialistic science stream. We live in a world created by materialistic science, which came from that stream. The people, the great scientists out of Goethe's stream are people like Victor Schauberger. I don't know if you know him.
Yep, I'm familiar.
Nikolai Tesla, Walter Russell,
Yep.
and they say very, very different things about the world than the materialistic stream. We
Yep.
literally, mainstream education literally teaches the students, young people, falsehoods about the world. So I'm saying, yes, we need to be aware of it, but in Waldorf actually teaches a children's level way of phenomenology. They teach science differently, which I agree with very much. But they tend to, even in the high school, they never actually inspire the students with these great scientists. What if
Yeah.
these high school students really actually learned about what Tesla and Schauberger and Russell really thought? What if they really knew it? Then we would have a new world.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. You have to not only use the Waldorf method of phenomenology, and the students don't have a clue really that there's something very deep here. You have to make sure that they get it. They get the inspiration. They do some study. They really get into it. And this is the aspect that the administrator at the Tekos school was interested in. They were interested in getting more into that.
That's very interesting. Right. And it also sounds to me like it's this process of like self-inquiry, right? Because these were deep thinking men, right? These were men who possessed this capacity for like Walter Russell, right? Talking about the electromagnetic nature of the universe and this whole spectrum of things. And that's a deep perception. And now it's being supported by science in a lot of ways, right? Even mainstream science is starting to see a lot of the things that he was talking about way back when. And these are men who are observing back to what Shchetinin said, enrolling people in the natural cosmic process, right? This unfolding process of life and inquiry and all these things. And actually, as you were speaking about the math thing in particular, it reminded me again of another quote from the books from Shchetinin. And he says, it's not the mathematics that's important here, but rather man learning mathematics, not math for its own sake, but maths for the sake of progress toward truth. Wow. And the more powerful this for the sake of motive is, the more successful will be one's immersion into a field of knowledge, right? It's kind of some
Yeah,
things you're making me reflect on here.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll go on to the next one.
Yep.
Curative education. This comes from Steiner. And Steiner, when he was in university, he worked as a tutor for a young man who had some kind of disease. I don't know the name of it, but the brain becomes swollen. It's all swollen.
Mm-hmm.
It can barely function.
Like fluid and everything.
Yeah, it's all swollen. And working with him in a particular education method, the swelling went away and the man became a normal learner. And from these
Mm-hmm.
experiences, he did these lectures called the Curative Education lectures. And when I became the education director, I noticed the teacher, the way she was working with her students, and I said, wow, you really have something different. And she told me she learned from a person named Robin Brown at a Curative
Mm-hmm.
Education Waldorf school. So I learned more about it, and I went there and observed her working with students who could not make it in any school, but she's working with them. And one of the things that was most
Mm-hmm.
impressive um, was their movement work. Steiner gave 3 indications for the curative education movement work every day: is balance, uh, gravity and levity experiences, and expansion contraction, and
Mm-hmm.
movement out of yourself. Don't just imitate or anything like that. It comes out of yourself. So every morning they would do movement for about 30 minutes, and it was extraordinary. There's no talking, actually. The students
Mm-hmm.
just comfortable, no talking. But they would do these incredible balance type exercises, sometimes with their eyes
Mm-hmm.
closed on a thin beam, and these things on a trampoline bouncing, and these type of rolling and contracting type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course they did chores, which is also part of it. So she had a curative education school.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, why don't you come to our school and teach us about it? And she came every month to the faculty meeting. And at the end of it, she said, my notes, I've done this so well, I think I'll write a book. And then she wrote this book, which is very popular now in Waldorf education, a practical method for curative education.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, to a large degree, all modern children have need of some curative education. I remember a trip a long time ago at my first cycle of students, and we went
Mm-hmm.
to a farm. Called a Camp Hill Farm, and they're all city children. And we went there, and as we drove up and got into the place, I saw about 6 of the country farm children sitting on the fence. And again, just with some spiritual sight, I looked at those children and compared them to these children, these city children. I said, wow, this
Mm-hmm.
is different. Just by being out in the country and living this life, they are different than these city children. All the city children are somewhat out of balance. So curative education is a part of it, whether it's a little part of a child or a big part, because some children are very fixed in different things. This curative
Mm-hmm.
education is necessary just to be integrated in. See, the public school, they they take the children out. They have a specialist, special education, and they're not really even going
Yeah.
deep. They're not going deep. And the teachers have no clue about what is really a curative way to approach it. So what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying is that all the teachers at the school need, and maybe even the parents, all the teachers, parents need to read the book, understand it, and everybody is working out of this, because one of the most important parts of it actually goes back to how you see the child, how you see
Mm.
the child. For example, I'll give a quick story
Oh.
again. Um, in the 7th grade of my first time through, I had a bunch of students come in, but one of them was Nick, and Nick is kind of surly from his previous experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
got a writing assignment, and he's just sitting there with a blank paper. And I come over, and he's not writing a thing. He can't. He thinks he can't. So I said,
Mm.
okay, Nick, just think of one word. Okay, you got it? Okay, now write that word on the paper. And he writes
Mm-hmm.
the paper. And then I said, okay, you got the whole of writing. You had a thought and it went into your hand and you wrote it. I'll take your paper and you get an A. Okay. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the next time is like, can you think of 3 words or 5 words? Yeah, I can think of 5. And he writes it down. And then he discovers, actually, I can write. Actually, you find out after a month, he likes to write and he's writing.
Wow.
So he's got a lot of thoughts. He's a very intelligent boy, very inquisitive, but he was squashed from the past. But the
Wow.
important part of the curative part is I don't see him as having problems. I see him as an intelligent young man. And then I just get him going. Once I get him going, I get the momentum and I build on that momentum. That's curative
Hmm.
education.
Hmm. This almost
So
makes me think of what you said earlier, identifying the gifts, right? It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
you could see he had this thinking capacity and you're just helping him translate it out.
yeah.
Ah,
But it needs to
fascinating.
be integrated into a school. It's not a special thing taken out and they go to special education, which is actually, it doesn't work that well anyway. Uh,
No,
so integrated in through curative education.
very fascinating.
Yeah. And then the last one, number 9, is work and skill. And I put this one in after I saw a movie, The Secret of Rune Inish. It's an
Mm,
Irish movie. And in the movie, they have to leave an island and it's abandoned there. There's all kind of mythology in it, but the important part is that these two young people, one's about a young boy about 13 and the young girl who's about 8 years old, and they decide they want to go back to the island and fix up the cottage again. So
hmm.
they just get in the rowboat and they row over there and they start working. They do everything. They rethatch the roof, they repair the walls, they clean it out, they make a garden, they make a fence, they do everything. They catch fish so they can have something to eat. They do virtually everything. And it's like nothing. It's like nothing to them. It's just natural. This is the
Mm.
way they're brought up. Okay. That's work and real skill, that you just find ways to bring it in, whether it's the parents or the school. It's interesting. Another kind of inspiration for this is the Amish way.
Hmm.
The Amish have school. People think they only have school from grade 1 through 8 to learn just what they need to learn, basically. But that's not actually true. The Amish have a learning community, and they may just do formal schooling 1 to 8, and then they're learning all the time through work,
In their life.
through their faith, through their community and dealing with people. It's a learning community. So that's number 9 for the 9.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. And as you're saying that, it makes me think that experience when Anastasia gave Vladimir the vision of Shchetinin school the first time, right? She kind of showed him this image of what the school was, and he sees these children who are happy and they're singing and they're building this building, right?
Yeah,
They are working on it. And you know, for like even an adult, building a building could be considered a pretty like stressful task by for a lot of people, right? You would associate it with stress and difficulty and all this, but the kids are joyful, they want to do it, they're engaged. And then we saw all these photos earlier of the end result. They painted all those murals and things on the, it's unbelievable. Like even what they're able to produce, right? And these are young kids, and there's a range of them all the way up to 18 and stuff building this building. And they're completely involved. They do it joyfully, and the result is magnificent. And and one thing I think would be interesting as well, you're talking about the Amish and their way of life and formal schooling, grade 1 to 8, and then how after life is kind of teaching them. Anastasia shares much the same thing. Oh, look at our little guy here. But I did a presentation about Anastasia's educational method at a like an education conference, and I tried to summarize everything, a very difficult task about what she says about education into, you know, some slides and present it to people. But one of the important things I had to leave out was like my presentation didn't touch at all on how the entire Vedic way of life was the school, right? And how she talks about the school was this series of joyous festivals and things that the kids participated in over time. And like even the wedding rite being a form of examination, she said the wedding rite itself was on a level many times higher than a doctoral thesis, right? And the planting of the garden and the design of the king's domain. I was like, I can't even touch on that here, but I'm like, I got all this other stuff. Um, so yeah, incredible what you're saying here with the pillars and a lot of really deep things there. Yeah, beautiful.
yeah, you're so right, Gabriel, and that's kind of why I like the way Jason put it. For us now, the Tekos school, Anastasia, the real communities, that's like the transcendental level that we can look to. But I'm presenting something that can be worked with in schools, and
Right.
actually just to bringing it
And
down to methods and how to work with it.
and it's amazing. I just have to say, like, the thing is, yeah, you are doing that transition because for those kids, it will be easier to transit to the kids domain, to build the community, to build their settlements. Because nowadays, at the settlements, there are a lack of people who understand all those 9 points you mentioned, right? So I think that's transition really needed to be implemented in like our everyday life society, our education which we have now, right? We can't just say no to that education. We have to do that smart transition. And all the
Mm,
points you said, it's exactly what we needed for that transition to bring that first step by little steps to new generation minds, so they will build more beautiful, more like harmoniously society. So I just really have to say that even I saw the kids who were raised in kids domains in their settlements, they definitely do have like that knowledge about how to live on the land, how to plant, how to pick up and when different types of wild plants and all those things. But we still need that classical education. We do still need to be in the city and to know how to communicate with the people, not just with nature, not only with parents, but with everyone around, because we are all one. Like city people with the settlements, we still on the same planet, and just think that's important to do that little steps and that transition and that little changes in our educational system nowadays.
Yeah, Jason and I, we visited a kin domain. We were there about 3 days and met the children. I wish I could have spoken in English, but I mean in Russian. But anyway, my impression of the schooling and the children, that was some time ago, 6, 7 years ago. But
mm,
my impression was one, the parents are too busy,
Mm-hmm.
really too busy. It's hard. And two, they don't really have the education together. They have a schoolroom, but it's just kind of like kinda. It's not really vibrant like the Tekos school at all, not even a minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
third, the students, they really great. They look healthy, but they don't really care about deep learning. Um, they're not getting it, and they
Yes,
don't.
they need
They
to
just
learn more
kind
like
of
survive.
they
Mm-hmm.
just kind of feel like, well, we can play, we can run around anywhere we want, but they don't really have a deep feeling for this type of
Mm.
stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I think they're lacking in their kin domains. When I visited, I can't say for everywhere, but that's what my impression.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I saw something similar. I went to a King's Domain settlement in 2016 and observed they have common houses on the settlement and stuff like that that they use for schools and classes, and different parents and people from the settlement will lead different classes and things like that. But I would say it's kind of what you're saying as well. I'd imagine, it wasn't as vibrant or engaged, and the parents are busy, and there's these things, right? And so yeah, it's really interesting. I'd be interested to hear more your thoughts about that, because I really like what, you're presenting here, and it's very appealing. It's very rational and very grounded.
Yeah, it's what I keep coming back to. It's something people really, unless you're a Shchetinin, you need a form. You need a form, a method, a something to follow and to work with. And so that's what I'm offering to a large extent.
Hmm. Hmm. And so in your vision, how would you best see, and correct me on the pronunciation, Aire, right? Aire education.
I
Um,
say airy, but who
Aire.
knows?
Gotcha. Area education being implemented. Is this something like and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Svetlana had told me that you had presented the method to like Waldorf teachers or something relatively recently, and there was a positive reception. Um, is that how that went?
Yeah, right now I'm working with the school that I was working at before I
Hmm.
became ill. And that just came out of the blue kind of thing. I sent it to a person I knew there, a website, a previous website.
Yep.
And then eventually she called and said, we're really struggling and we need a new vision. And then
Hmm.
we did the website more towards a school. And I
Yep.
went up there and presented to the board, and they really liked it. They're very capable people. And then I went back and presented to a certain amount of parents. There was about 15 parents there, and they also liked it. And so we continue to move forward. They are taking steps to do this. I'm presently working with what could be the sixth, seventh grade teacher. Uh,
Hmm.
and I'll see her again tomorrow. One of the things she's coming up with is which is why I brought it up, is a social disturbance from a particular student. But
Yeah.
partly, I think, because the previous way the school was, the student has become fed up with it. And so
Mm.
probably these students, they see the public school and they think the grass is greener on the other side and all this type of stuff. So probably the student is acting up so she can get out of the school. But meanwhile, she's disrupting the class and she's exhausting the teacher and making the teacher ill. So
Hmm.
that can be difficult, especially in a transition time. And so that's what I'm working with at the present moment.
Hmm. That's very interesting.
Now, if this
And
school gets off the ground, maybe it will be like a proven model. But quite frankly, I think like my son Jason, there was a guy, I can't remember his name. He works in the breathing field, he founded his line of gyms and he's very, big entrepreneur.
hmm.
And I think eventually he started talking about education, and that he wants to get involved in education and make changes and this and that. And
Hmm.
someone like that could also be a possibility.
I think it's Alex Hormozy he might be referencing, maybe.
No, it was gosh, I can't remember. Area, not area, area, area. I forget his name.
Okay.
Bilal, he's from Eastern Europe. Vlad or Vladimir, not Vladimir. Anyway,
Gary?
doesn't matter.
It's not Gary Vaynerchuk, is it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I follow a few of those entrepreneurs on social media.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And I have a question for you. So, would you, what would your advice be towards parents or people who are doing any kind of homeschooling, right? Because I'm thinking about our audience here. People are, um, I'd imagine, there's some Waldorf teachers in our audience who may be listening. There are parents who maybe want to go down a homeschooling path, right? Or are already perhaps on one. Maybe their kid is in public school and they want to, do homeschooling or maybe start like like educational, a little school themselves. And there's this whole spectrum of people who are listening. So what would you try to say to these people, give them advice?
Well, I think everything depends on advice, depends on the circumstances, the
Sure.
situation of the individuals. And that's one of the reasons I like the nine pillars, because you can focus on one area or another. Uh,
Hmm.
so in terms of even giving that type of advice, I have the Area Education website, and anybody can make a free call, set up a free call, and I
Hmm.
can talk about it that way.
Right.
I will say in general that I think the parents, it's if the parents need to be on their own path, and they usually are. Homeschoolers, these type of independent, they're already on their own path, but
Hmm.
they need to be on the path, for example, real history or what I'm talking about. Because when I say real history, you could have people at different levels, really at different levels. And that's the way
Yeah.
it goes because it's a quest. But
Hmm.
understanding this so that you can be doing this and your children can have that sense that you're doing it as well. And Yeah, that's what I would say.
Hmm. Like you kind of being on your path with the kids,
Yeah.
right? Rather than imposing something externally.
Yeah, the
Right.
same with the same with heritage and roots.
Hmm.
You know, if you have it, your children will have it. If you don't have it and you're an yeah, that's a part of it too. You need to look at your own indoctrinations.
Hmm.
You need to become aware of it. And it's not like you're going to get it all at one time either. I kind of was thinking at a certain point as a joke, so I'm saying it as a joke, that you need a life-threatening illness, um,
Hmm.
because it's such a great teacher to really make you look at yourself and say, you know, wow, you know, and you have to transform. You have to.
Hmm.
So that's a joke. You don't need that. Really, you don't need that.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
but you do need to look at your own indoctrinations because you want to be able to teach out of some level of freedom,
Mm.
some level of freedom. And freedom is always growing in you. You are free, but obviously we don't recognize it. But we do get parts of it. And eventually we'll get the whole picture.
Mm.
I'm going to mention a resource, by the way, and just a book,
Please.
because there's so much confusion um, around political things and things like that. So it's hard to think about it. But I came across a book by a Vedic scholar named
Hmm.
Sri Dharma Pravataka Archaya, and
Hmm.
it's Dharma
Acharya. Yep.
Manifesto. Do you know it?
What was the name of the book?
Dharma Manifesto.
No, I haven't heard of
Okay,
that.
well, this is the book. He doesn't shy away from looking at society and
Hmm.
the way things are. Doesn't shy away from it at all. And this book goes to Vedic teachings and says, this is the way a Dharma society would look. So we're not looking at communism, capitalism, blah, 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 all these things. This is
Isms.
what a Dharma would look like. He brings up
Hmm.
philosopher kings type of thing. And he has a
Right.
book about leadership. It's basically saying that the reason we're so bad off is because of the leadership. This is what Vedic says about leadership, what a true leader looks like. All right.
Right.
So these
Right.
two books, I think, are also helpful to become clear. And it doesn't mean that you're going to say, oh, I'm going to need to follow him. It doesn't, because he's actually very small anyway. But when you
Hmm.
get this, then you can recognize in the world what is in accord with Dharma. I mean, one of the things he also gives history, and part of his history is that the world really was all Dharma culture at one time. All around the
Hmm.
whole world, this was this Dharma cultures, which translates as natural law, kind of living according to natural law and
Hmm.
nature. And then the Abrahamic religions came in, and he gives the history of these Abrahamic religions and how they were so different, and how one of the things they really just seem to stamp out the Dharma cultures. And then we became very confused. So he's saying, what would it look like if our political, our educational, our immigration, our medical was in a line with Dharma culture? That's what he's putting forth.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I remember a quote from Anastasia, and she says, to raise children, we need to raise ourselves,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
And this is kind of what I'm thinking about here. It's like we have to continuously keep evolving and be transparent about it. And it's a process. We're not these perfected beings, especially, acknowledging, as you said, our own indoctrination, right? We grew up in this world. We have absorbed some of the consequences of living in that world, and we're all on a process out of it, right? And that's where we are. And we know generally the direction, like the right direction, right? Towards the world where we're trying to go, and we're not there yet. And, these brilliant little angels, these children can probably see the way and how to get there a lot better than us. And yeah, it's just that's kind of what I'm thinking of. And I remember earlier you said a very interesting thing about Waldorf education kind of having a more feminine kind of nature, right? And this is right the emphasis on the arts and the story and like the right brain, kind of those things, you know, and forgive my generalization of it, but and then classical education being more of a masculine influence in those ways, and then Shchetinin's method, or what Anastasia describes in her approach, being kind of a transcendental thing. Can you talk more about that?
Which part?
Um, well, in general, but more what you're mentioning about the transcendental nature of what Shetinin and Anastasia put forward. I found how you call that transcendental to be very interesting.
Yeah, that was my son's term, and it kind of
Hmm.
applies and it kind of doesn't. Because as you can see or hear with the 9 pillars, numerous places where I'm learning from the Tekos school and applying
Hmm.
it right in there, such as the character building, or the mixed age students. Maybe that actually helps social issues to have mixed age.
Yeah.
As Mr. Shetinin said, that having children the same age in the same classroom goes against the soul nature of the child. So if that's
Hmm.
true, then you already have a social problem with the students because you've
Fundamentally.
gone against something. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm already taking the things we can take from Takeo School and bringing it in. But it does have something. I don't know if it's transcendental. We simply don't know.
Mm.
I would call it mysterious, but that's not a great word for attracting people. Like
Hmm.
the math thing, that's a mystery. It's a mystery, and I don't know how they organize. There's a lot of not knowing how they organize, how they get the children to do things. I do know, he said, that the children, as they study different subjects and find correlations, when you find
Hmm.
correlations, you find God in a way, because the
Hmm.
unity, it's all a unity by finding these. Okay, but how do you organize that? So for me, if this school, for example, if they were to really get into this Aire Education and
Hmm.
develop it, and I don't know about the class that's now in the sixth, seventh, but as they move
Hmm.
along and get more students, the best way to do this would be at a certain point, you send a group of students to Russia, to like maybe the Synergy School, and they go
Yep.
there for a month and they learn it themselves. An adult can be there too, but the children get it and then bring it back.
Mm.
That would be the way to do it.
Interesting. And then let the children kind of present their findings and how they assimilated that experience.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to what Mikhail said. I do believe he said
Hmm.
something like, "You just start it, and then the children will bring it out." Yeah,
That's
it kind of
fascinating.
works, kind of doesn't work. I think the children would need to visit somewhere and learn.
Hmm. Right. That experience of being there, right? Kind of
Mhm.
getting that vibration, that experience directly. Hmm.
And really taking notes. How do you do this? How do you organize? How do you do this? How do you, everything? Just get notes of it all and bring it back.
Hmm.
If they get the notes and they get this kind of a form of way of doing things, a how to do things, they can come back and then they start doing it, and then they'll find out what works, and their own
Hmm.
genius will come out and their creativity will come out. But to
Hmm.
just do that on your own, I don't even see it happening.
Yeah.
The only reason it came into the world was because of Mr. Shetinin.
Right.
His genius, his Vedam capacity, him going out and studying all these different schools, him contemplating it deeply, that's how
Yep.
it came into being. It's not like a
Yep.
bunch of students got together and created it,
Right.
or
Yeah,
It
a bunch
was
of students and a parent. That didn't happen. It came from a wise man.
it was all
right.
around him. Everyone who went there, and you remember Paulina, she was studying there. Remember, we had
This is a
interviewed
young
her.
woman from a settlement that
Yes, she was
Svetlana
studying.
is
And
referring to.
she's my friend, and she said it's like it's all around him. When she was there, she was say it's constantly you do something because you have something inside you, like urge to learn that and that. It's like her their own world, like another universe, like little universe in the universe, and everything kind of circling and around that. I think same like back to their books when Anastasia was telling how everything was created by creator, is that love and purity of thoughts and all those energies balancing together. I think Shchetinin, like also people who met him, they probably, you Robert, felt that something inside him, like his heart, his soul had been open so much for love for the kids, love for their, like all human beings. And that's something strong in him, kind of make it created around that thing. That's, I think, exactly there. We are just going back to ourselves again, I think, to learn how to be that person and how to see that creator in the kids, in all people around, right? And that's probably exactly what Anastasia was trying to tell us too, like to see that creator in your kid will make him a creator, the true. So I think that's like I've been listening, and I always, like when I listen you, I go back to myself, like as you said, like parent can't give anyone anything to the kid if he is not has that something inside, that conscience and all those things. And I think nowadays that's why in the school it's, I think, easier to give that to the kids than in a family, if you don't feel that conscience or that purity in yourself. That's probably better step. It's to go to the more conscious school or board or group of people, or like to sorry to make it happen.
And just a quick note for our audience, when Robert earlier mentioned the Synergy School is founded by a friend of ours named Nikolai, and he
Mhm.
was a friend and you could say student or like mentee of Mikhail Shchetinin, right? And so Nikolai now has a school in uh, Gelendzhik, basically, right? So Lana, it's in Gelendzhik, right?
Yeah, it's near
Yeah.
Dolmens.
It's near the dolmens and everything. And
Mhm.
we did an interview with him several years ago, and probably we'll do another one. But it's a beautiful forest school. But the point being that as Robert was mentioning, this light kind of came from Shatinin and was passed on to all these other people. And Nikolai is a shining example. And it's a beautiful forest school that they've built. And so it seems to be what I'm seeing here is that there's both, right? Because what came from Shatinin was a process of really deep self-inquiry and universal inquiry, right? And his search into the cosmic processes and probably many, many years of like deep meditation and thought and reflection and probably prayer and being out in nature and looking at the stars and all these deep things and like opening himself to where some of these deeper things began to emanate through him. And then he passes this experience on to other people and you can, right? So we're all invited to go on our own process of self-discovery and self-inquiry and open ourselves up more and also go out and experience what the world has to offer and what all these wonderful people have to offer. It's an interesting idea.
I think that, and I think two things would make it more possible.
Mm,
For one, is a book of Shatinin's thoughts, his pedagogy, his worldview, because then you can read it and you can become that. That's what's necessary. You
right.
need to become it, but you need a tool to become it. The
Hmm.
other thing is that there is a method, actually. It's not just Shatinin sitting in his office. He organized
Hmm.
the method. There's a rhythm, there's a method, but we don't know what the method is. Maybe they know at Synergy School, but I don't know what the method is. If the
Hmm.
children went, that's like I say, take notes and learn how to do it. Or a book
Interesting.
wouldn't be as good for that. it's better to be a visit. But there is a method, and then there is the essence of Shchetinin thought and his worldview that you can absorb through a book. Put those together, and I believe the schools could be replicated.
Hmm. Well, you've given me inspiration for a really exciting project because I was secretly working on another book project. And this, the idea of education is really near and dear to me. That's why I'm really excited to talk with you today, Robert. And um, you know, thank you for the idea. And I would like to do something like that because that could be fascinating. You could interview the students and the teachers and all these different age ranges and all these people who knew Shchetinin. So unfortunate. I was supposed to visit the school in 2016 when I went to Russia, but I ran out of money while I was there and I couldn't take the tour with Yuri. I was going to go on the tour with Yuri and go and go meet Shchetinin, but that's not what was planned in this life. So maybe in the next one, that great man. I wish I could just shake his hand. Um, but yeah, that's a beautiful idea. I would love to carry something like that out. And yeah,
Do you
how did
have,
he arrive at those things? He was a profoundly beautiful person.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you have the articles that were written about his thoughts?
I have some.
The,
Yeah.
I forget the name. It was Yuri was putting out a magazine,
Space of Love magazine.
Face of Love. There was about 3 or 4 articles in there.
Yep. I got a
I
few
have, but
copies,
I
physical
can't
copies
find
in
it.
my other room here.
Yeah,
And yeah, I do remember there being some things about Shatinin in there. I think he might have interviewed him um once or twice. Yeah, or maybe more times. Yeah, because Yuri was constantly going to the school.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I had read some stuff in Russian as well. There's a lot of great stuff from him in Russian. And there's like old videos even on YouTube of him speaking
Mm.
and talking about education to groups of professors and other teachers in Russia, and just his countenance and his posture and his like it was incredible. Svetlana, you showed me those videos, I think. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
videos of him talking.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, there are many videos, and there is a group like in Russian social media where people who knew him, especially after he died, they put a lot of articles about him. So I might search and maybe we can translate that.
You
And
should
also,
send
have you
those to me.
heard
We could
about,
translate them.
yeah, have you heard about Shalva Manashvili?
no,
Nope.
No?
Oh, actually, no,
Gabriel
I know him. Sorry. I know him.
Shalva
Yep.
Manashvili, their гуманная педагогика.
Hmm.
I'm
Human
not sure how
pedagogy,
to,
right? Isn't that
yeah,
human
so
or like human
he
centered?
was he has now huge sort of educational system for parents and teachers, and he was a friend with the Shchetinin and like they have same vision and everything. It's just they use different type of bringing it to the society. So I'm gonna send you, and Robert, I will try to send you as well and find maybe there are YouTube videos so you can see it with the subtitles. So like how he introduced the education, and he gives a lot of advice to the parents, and they have courses like regarding that. And he has a good article about Shchetinin as well.
Hmm.
Uh, s- so that I think that might be very um, useful to put it in a book or
Yeah.
yeah.
And oh, go ahead. Robert, were you going to speak? I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
I'm only thinking, sometimes there's a lot of resources actually,
Hmm.
but for practical purposes, like for example, the school I'm working with, practical
Hmm.
purposes, the book has to be focused. The focus kind of needs to be like not too scattered all around from here and
Hmm.
from here and from here, but really not too big and focused. And the purpose, your audience is a group of people who want to create this. And
Hmm.
so that it kind of needs a focus.
Yeah. And I think, well,
Yeah,
now we're
makes sense.
ideating about this book, even the method of like using story, right? I can imagine the stories of transformation of the children from when they first went to the school to when they left are probably like many, many profound stories in there and lots of learning, as Anastasia presented many things in the form of story, and we wind up picking it up in that way. And yeah, it could be really interesting. But we're getting close to like the 2 hour mark, and I want to just maybe start to wrap it up. And Robert, I want to say, first of all, thank you for your time and sharing all this. It's incredibly interesting and insightful, and I'm sure our listeners have gained a lot from this. And I want to ask you, because what we're talking about education, right? The children and helping these people develop in character and wisdom and go out into the world and fill the world with light and joy and beauty. It's like it's a really deep and profound thing. And this educational mission that you've embarked on, right? I want to ask you, like, what would be you know, your message to the world, right? About all of this, about education. What would you want people, to know or to think about on these things?
That's a hard question.
I understand it's a big question.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of anything actually to give to the world. I just tend to think in terms of um, how to make it better. I see Waldorf and I saw Waldorf. When I first entered it, it was, God, this is so great. And like
Mm,
it was to a certain degree. And then it really had people an influence enter that really made it's really not great
becoming
at
kind of
all,
politicized, right?
politicized in a bad way.
Yeah.
And and yet I didn't know it could have been better anyway. There were weaknesses in it. And so again, when I finally went to the Shchetinin school, it's like, wow, such a vision, but it's also very, very high vision, a very
Hmm.
deep vision. And I don't know how to get there. Okay.
Yeah.
But if we combine things and if I can make something better, if we can create something, okay, how to make something better is just what I'm trying to do.
Hmm.
That works. If it works, it has to prove itself.
Hmm.
Just it's easy to think of stuff, but you have to prove it. It has to prove itself, and then maybe it changes, and you keep learning. So that's all I'm doing with
Got
education.
it. Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Our listeners, if you made it this far, thank you for your attention. And if anyone wants to learn more about you or connect with you or Aire Education, how can they best do that?
The website.
Okay.
I don't know if they have access to it, but it's
We'll
just
put a link in the video and
yeah,
everything like that.
yeah.
Okay. And Svetlana, anything you want to share before we jump off?
Just want to say thank you. It was very interesting, and I got to learn so many things. So thank you, Robert. And yeah, I'm looking forward to like learn more and to kind of be on the same page and help even my kids to like be in a sort of more happier society and education system as well. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. We should have another meetup.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do another Texas meetup.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Sorry
Okay.
for the.
Well, thank you too, Gabriel. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah. My pleasure. Yeah, this is great. Okay, one second. Going